Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
No, you're not.
So sometimes there's the breakdown, the description of what we're looking for, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the feedback or the cue that you're going to give.
Welcome to yet another episode of 80% Mental. I'm Dr. Pete Olusoga, and I'm joined as ever by the one and only Hugh Gilmore. Hugh, it's been a while, hasn't it, since we last recorded one of these things?
Yeah, it's been too long, Pete. I've actually missed it. I'm really looking forward tonight.
Yeah, well, at the time of recording, we've just passed 20,000 downloads.
Yep.
Which is quite impressive. I'm quite impressed with myself and yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, we've done a good job, but I'd say you've done most of the work.
And we've got a few recordings lined up in the next few weeks as well, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, definitely. Season 2 is shaping up. I'm quite excited as well because this one ties in with the previous episode that we did with Arthur Lynch on burnout in powerlifting. So, yeah, it's a good link to be linking these episodes up. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, I had my first COVID vaccine yesterday. The euphoria lasted approximately 20 minutes, and I feel like absolute crap today, which is good because that's what my body's supposed to be doing. Vaccines are great. Get vaccinated. And I think we should take the opportunity with the platform we've got to promote the idea of vaccinations as a miracle of modern science.
Do you know what? I know some people who are anti-vaxxers, and that's okay. That's good if you're an anti-vaxxer. But I would say to you, there's a really good video.
Well, it's not good.
Well, I don't know. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but there's a really good video from Penn and Teller about vaccination, and it is a really good visual way of explaining to people how good vaccines are, because you're more likely to have side effects and have negative consequences if you don't get vaccinated. And that goes for all the things that we've eradicated by vaccinations. So if somebody doubts the vaccine, go watch the Penn and Teller video on vaccination, because it really, it drove the message home for me, and I hate needles.
And, if anti-vaxxers are listening and decide they don't want to listen anymore, then I can live with that. Anyway, should we just get on with it?
Okay, let's get on with it.
They're not really our core fan base, are they, anti-vaxxers? Flat earthers, they can sort off as well. Anyway, let's get on with it, and let's introduce our topic and our guests for today. I think it's fair to say that the majority of an athlete's work's done when you're not watching, right? The hours of practice, watching tape, thinking about tactics, strategy, working on technical elements, skill development, nutrition, rehab, prehab, rest, recovery. All of this takes place behind closed doors, but it's vital in making sure an athlete is ready to perform when the lights come on. And when we think of strength and conditioning as well, we might picture athletes doing endless back squats and bench pressing for days, but there's a lot more to this side of athlete preparation than just picking up heavy things and putting them down again, and picking them up again and putting them down again, and picking them up again and putting them down again.
Well, there's also you have to put them back where you got them as well, Pete.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, I once read Super Training from Mel C. Siff. It's a big Bible of a textbook. And I say I once read it. I didn't read it all the way through. But when I did go through it, I noticed that it mentioned anything. When it mentioned anything psychological, I put a post-it in, and I stopped at 22 or 27 post-its about how many times psychology was mentioned. And that's considered one of the big original textbooks of strength and conditioning. So it's clearly important. And this book was out in the 90s. So I'm interested to find out what today's guests think about this.
Well, that's what we're going to do. And, as usual, we start the episode with a question. We try and sort of muddle our way through with the help of some guests. And the question we're going to try and answer on today's episode of the podcast is, how can I bring psychology into the weight room? And as always, we've got two experts. Well, not always, because you don't always have two. But we have two experts on this episode to try and help us answer that question in the next hour or so. So first up, we've got Dave Hembrough, Esquire. He wrote that on his form. Dave was a S&C coach who did some weightlifting. became a weightlifting coach who did some S&C, and now uses those skills and an interest in people to try and make the world a happier, stronger, and better place. Dave, welcome to 80% Mental.
Hello Pete, hello Hugh, hi Nick, great to be here this evening.
Dave, I think anybody that knows you, well, what happens is I get our guests in advance to write their own introductions. And what I think, well, anybody who knows Dave will know that he sold himself short there a little bit, humble as ever. Dave, can you tell us a little bit about some of your experiences in the world of strength and conditioning and training?
Sure. Well, first off, I've got to tip the metaphorical brim of my hat to Nick Ward, as he gave me my first foot up onto the ladder of S&C. And thanks to him, I've had a career at Sheffield Hallam University, coaching athletes in a variety of sports. I've been lucky enough in that time to coach the Olympic Games, to coach Commonwealth medalists, to coach world champions in 3 different sports. And really fortunate to have those experiences. But also along the way, I've set up a weightlifting club called Hallam Barbell. And we deliver a whole range of different programs there, from competitive elite athlete programs where we have British record holders and international competitors, to programs for social change or mental health, really sort of using strength and conditioning principles, but for a wider audience. I always felt that just helping people win at sport against other people trying to also win at sport didn't really cut it for me, and there was more to what I wanted to do in my time on this earth. We're doing okay, me and Hallam Barbell, and we're getting a few awards and some great points of recognition. The main thing is that I'm enjoying it, and I'm still coaching.
No, that's awesome, and we'll talk a little bit more about that side of things in a little while, I think. But it's interesting that you mentioned Nick Ward as well, because by some amazing coincidence, our other guest is Nick Ward. Nick is Altis Program Director and Performance Coach. And Nick believes in the power of coaching to change lives. This is what I mean when I say that the guests write their own bios. He started coaching at 15 and has worked pretty much across the whole spectrum of sports, from local junior rugby teams right through to Olympic athletes. And Nick, it's fair to say that your coaching has taken you places?
Certainly has. One of the happiest places, of course, was Merry, Sheffield.
And where are you joining us from today?
Today I'm in South Lake Tahoe, which is Northern California, right on the border with Nevada. So pretty cool place to have been working and living in the last 4.5 years.
Oh, well, Nick and Dave, thank you both very much for joining us on this episode. Okay, so we're gonna kick things off straight away with a question about what you see as the mental challenges that athletes or maybe even coaches might come up against in the weight room. I'm going to start with Dave because he's taking a sip of his wine. What do you think, Dave? What are some of the mental challenges that that athletes or coaches might come up against in the weight room?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things going on when people are in what we're referring to on this episode as the weight room. There's a social dynamic between the individuals who are there at the time, whether that's them and the coach or them and the teammates or them and others training. And then there's the internal element as to what someone's setting out to do on a given day and to what extent they're switched on for that, believe they can achieve it. And with most athletes' situations, how they're feeling based on all the other stuff going on in their life from a training perspective and a personal life perspective. And that's what I think, as a coach, I've got to take on board to try and support the individual in front of me with all those things going on to make sure we'll have a good day and effectively win the workout.
Okay, Nick, what are your thoughts on that, on what Dave just said?
I mean, there's not a great more deal to add. I think he's nailed it in terms of the social dynamic that's going on. And, for me, the context or environments might be I'm in there with one squad of players, so we're the only people there. Or it could be I'm there with a couple of athletes and, in a general public facility. So I think the environment can can change. That dynamic. And the number one thing for me really is, what are the athletes there to do? What are they bought into? Where's their attention? What's their intention? What's their focus? Do they really believe that strength and conditioning is going to help them be a better athlete, and that it isn't just something that they have to do? And that's, I think, sometimes is a problem where I'm not going to say just young coaches here. I'd be wrong to say that, because I can see that with any coaches, where it's their weight room, it's their rules. This is what we're doing. This is what you have to do. And people are kind of put on a military route march to get stronger, rather than it being what I feel should be more of an immersive, interactive, relationship exchange over what the hell are they doing there in the first place.
Hugh, I want to bring you in here as well, because obviously you work in a strength sport. What do you make of what Nick and David just said there? They talked about the social dynamic and the purpose of athletes being in the strength and conditioning room. Like, what do you make of all of that?
I think it's interesting in the sense that, where you train can be as important as how you train. I can certainly think of clubs that have turned out impressive lifters and impressive athletes, and yet they have limited equipment. And to be frank, the coach probably had limited understanding as well. But the culture of competition within that club actually produces something special. So, I mean, that's a good question for you guys to answer, actually, is what's the difference between the culture that pushes performance in the gym versus the coach that pushes performance, and how would you seek to create better in both areas?
I've walked into multi-million dollar pound facilities. I've walked into plush health clubs with professional soccer players, and I've also walked into 20 square foot of space at Don Valley Stadium with Sheffield Eagles rugby players, where there's been one squat rack, 2 bars, and a bunch of dumbbells. And if you would want to ask me which environments have I found where there's been the right, we can debate culture v environment as well, where I felt the environment was set that led to the appropriate behaviours we were looking for. It was two times in my life. One was Sheffield Eagles, and over the period of time where we were back-to-back champions, and then also with Derbyshire Institute of Sport. And I'm going to add a third one, actually, when we had our first facility here at Lake Tahoe as well, before we moved into the plush new one. Something just kind of changed in the environment and the way things just kind of felt and worked out. So, the Sheffield Eagles example is that we had minimal equipment. We didn't have much space. We had a squad of players where at the time we were a part-time rugby club. They weren't full-time. And players were coming in after finishing work and could be in a certain headspace. Other players got there early. Some were rushing to get there late. And for some of them, their only opportunity to actually do any strength work, power work, speed work was that 30, 45 minutes before we walked out on the field and did the training out on the field. And, all I basically did was I roped off an area then in front of that, very, very small, 10 by 8 or 15 by 8 foot space, and roped an area off, put a whiteboard up the front, and basically said, only enter if you're here to get better. And on the back of the whiteboard, as they walked out of that space, it would say, you've just got better. And there was a rule. If you want to be a dick and mess around and not really, clue into joining in that session, then stay out of that space. Don't come in. Respect your other teammates, that they're in there because they've decided they want to focus on that part of their development. So don't disrupt that for them. Stay out of that roped off area. And we extended it again in discussion with the players another time that, players wanted to go into that space, but they might not necessarily want to interact straight away. So we had two different coloured mattings. We had a blue mat, and I think it might have been a red mat. That if people were on the red mat, probably the wrong colour to use, but on the red mat, it was basically fuck off, don't talk to me. But I'm gonna sort myself out. I'm gonna go through my warm up, and and just kind of leave me alone for a bit. But I am here to be part of what we're trying to do. And so those couple of things, I think, just set some, I don't want to call them barriers, thresholds, understanding really of what it meant then to walk into that, blue taped off area and that bit of space that we had to manage that weight room.
It's interesting the way you're describing that. What you sound as if you're discussing is basically non-negotiables, clear expectations of what players want. So it allows for people to be flexible in that environment and to understand each other without even communicating. So it's nearly like a cultural way of operating. Pete, that sounds a lot like psychology to me. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it does. We're 15 minutes into the podcast and we're talking about things like culture and values and motivation and kind of getting athletes in a space where they can train in a way that's most conducive to them making progress, right, and getting better, as Nick was saying. And it just goes to show, like I say, 15 minutes in, we're already talking about all of that stuff. It shows the importance of psychology in lifting up heavy weights and putting them down again.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, Nick, you've highlighted what the culture was, but I mean, the culture is a standard that you're prepared to walk by, I suppose, is a good way of expressing it. So I'm really curious, what happens and how would you know when somebody was going against that culture, and what happened when that occurred? Was that, enforced by you? Was it enforced by the players? What did a breach of culture look like within that weight room that was producing this sort of environment for performance?
The players managed that for themselves as a leadership group. That they again understood what that was about, and it was also their safety as well as how well they can perform. It was a very, very tight space that we were in. There was a time I remember just sitting back on the steps, about 40, 50 yards away from the weight room, just watched it flow. Players coming in, players coming out. The workout was on the whiteboard. Players had individual options around that, which they were very unused to having. It was always come in and just do this. I think, as you said, it took time to get there. There was a culture of education, always explaining why, inviting questions, but also being there when maybe that wasn't going to fit for that person in terms of what their needs were. I'd have one guy who would come in, I think he was a school teacher actually, and he was kind of mentally exhausted when he would come in, and what he didn't want to do was kind of lie on the ground, hit a foam roller and do all that sort of stuff. He just wanted to get going. So I broke the warm-up rules for him. He got in and did other stuff to kind of get him lively and bright and ready for the training session. Players who might, in the past, right, someone might be in the middle of their squat and someone would come in and whip them on the back of the legs. That just isn't acceptable, right? But the players learn to manage that for themselves because they know, hey, you could hurt someone here. That isn't what we do. It was almost like, they would turf people out themselves of that kind of area because they knew we'd had that set up. And I was, although they know they're part of the chaos, it was almost like they respected the fact that I was going to try and help them manage that chaos. But ultimately, again, they're the pack of wolves. They have to manage that between themselves. And it wasn't really for me to come in externally and reprimand or punish or anything like that. Because in the sport of rugby league, if your mate hasn't got your back on the field, and they demonstrate that in the training sessions, those values that you guys spoke about have got to be apparent in both environments. They can't behave one way in the weight room and then behave a completely different way on the field. They have to learn that trust in all aspects of the different training environments that they find themselves in.
You know, I always like to say bullying requires teamwork. So it's maybe not appropriate to say, but let's get everyone involved, and that's what bullying's all about. But to a certain extent, you do bully people who shouldn't be there out of the room, and that's what creating a club and that's what creating a culture is all about. Is there's a line, you're either in here or you're out there, and if you're trying to bring the out there in here, you're going to get bullied and pushed out of it. And I think it's without being too facetious, there is a certain degree of acceptability in that, because you can't, as one person, uphold the standards within a rugby club. It has to be the club hold it up. I'm curious, Dave. You operate in a different environment, and there's actually a culture that's spread far and wide. And what you've done at Holland Barbell in terms of building strength through culture and culture through strength has been phenomenal to watch over the last couple of years. Culture and strength in Holland Barbell. Talk to me about that. What's your observations, and how do you relate to what Nick said?
Well, I think first of all, I've got to make a guilty admission that I'm not a great performance coach, because I'm not particularly competitive myself, and when I coach people, I'm more interested in the people than the performance and the outcome. And that Sheffield Eagles environment that Nick's talking about, where they really were driven for physical success and to dominate the opposition and take some really significant measures to do so. That's not my natural inclination and outlook. And in fact, a lot of the performance sports I've worked with aren't as developed as that. And actually, you've got young athletes that are figuring themselves out, figuring the world out, and probably most importantly, they want to enjoy what they do, because then they keep doing it and keep coming back. And in some of the minor sports, like weightlifting, that to become a champion, become an awesome champion, you need to be thoroughly weightlifting through and through, and have the right gene pool. But in a lot of spaces, just by working hard consistently for a decent period of time, can get you to a good place. And so in terms of sort of culture with that, I like to give people good experience and have good connection. I want them to enjoy the environment, enjoy the training, and I know that will leave a positive impact where they'll want to keep coming back. Particularly young athletes or young weightlifters, I'll give them space and give them time and let them explore, and we'll do a little less work to have a little more talk, because that's a point of them having a learning journey and discovering where they fit into the whole training conundrum. I coach Sheffield Diving for almost 10 years now, and that's a similar effect. Looking to just help people get in, understand training, and apply themselves in an enjoyable way. And that's what we try and do at Holland Barbell, whether that's the weightlifting program where we are training for competition, or whether it's the kids who are 6 at youngest, or the older adults in the Strength for Life program where we got 17, 80-year-olds. It's a cultural thing to get in and enjoy the connection with the people, and know that you can work as hard as you want to get the results that you want.
It's interesting. I'm just seeing the difference here in that you're all about respecting the individual and developing the individual, and Nick's all about creating a group performance. And there's a trade-off there between the group's performance versus the individual's performance. And obviously, two different sports. And I think it's interesting that as a S&C coach, I've done my UKSCA qualification, and I've done my British weightlifting coaching qualifications, but no one's actually sat down and said to me, what's the difference in terms of coaching a group versus coaching an individual, and how do you manage an individual versus coach dynamic or group dynamic in your training, and account for, like, if you do too much of one, you're neglecting the other, and vice versa. What sort of trade-offs do you find yourself thinking along in a psychology terms within the strength and conditioning environment? Are there other trade-offs as well?
I think with that example, Hugh, experience I had is working at a rugby club, Rotherham Titans, so union, as opposed to league, when Nick was talking about the Eagles. I found that I was spending more time with the players that weren't massively engaged, and I was sort of begging and cajoling, trying to encourage them to do the warm-up properly and stretch and do the things I know they needed to do. and I was chasing them. And a rugby league coach who was working at the club, funnily enough, said to me, "Squeaky gate gets the oil. The squeaky gate gets the oil." And I didn't really know what he meant at the time, but I went away thinking about that. And what it meant was that I was chasing these players. They were the squeaky gate. And actually there was players who were bought in, engaged, working hard, and they were the ones that were deserving of my time. And as a result, I changed my tactics and I spent more time with the players that were working harder and deserving of that investment of time, and started to ignore the players that weren't. And I came along the terms of interested, involved and committed. And so I started to split the demographic. Who's interested? Well, they're there. They might not turn up regularly, they might not engage, but they're there, so they're interested. Who's really involved in terms of, they're there, but they get in the mix and they're perhaps more consistently in the mix, and then who's committed? Who'd be there, hell and high water, do whatever it takes to get to the training session and commit. And so I saw my job there as trying to take those players in those categories, just move them along to the next category. And if someone's involved, I could try and work them towards being in a committed point. If someone's just interested, it was how to then move them across into that involved status. The other trade-off of groups is giving people the right amount of time, the right amount of space. And that's difficult. And we've probably seen that when there's a star in the room and the star gets too much attention, and sometimes that's the last thing they need too. So that dynamic of how you spend your time and who you give your time to is really important. I guess the final thing I say is I really believe in creating independent athletes, not creating dependencies, and creating autonomy and giving an education. Most of the athletes I coach and coach for a long time, I know if they wrote their own program, they'd probably pretty much write what I was going to write anyway, because we've got that relationship and understanding.
Squeaky gates that gets the oil, as they say. That was my worst impression at flipping. I'm going to try it again. Squeaky gate gets the oil, lad. That's my best northern accent. Nick, I don't think that northern approach, playing playing up to your athlete's needs, probably fits at Altus. Is there a version of Squeaky gate gets the oil, lad, at Altus?
You need to stop saying that.
I think actually 100% what Dave just said is ingrained in the Altus philosophy and principles, that it's about, our vision is the one of a self-determining athlete, and following, that kind of concept of self-determination. So even within, and Altus is track and field, so it is all about the individual athlete. When I first met Stuart McMillan back in the mid-90s and hung out in Calgary and then came back to Britain to work, I very much came in with that. I want to work with individuals who just happen to be part of a team. And one of the methodologies that Dan Path kind of espoused with us is this concept of mailboxing. And very much like Dave said, you kind of look at your group and look at similar characteristics that might enable you within a group session to treat them for one particular virus or one particular goal for that day. So you would organize your groups accordingly. And, whether that be, behaviors, or whether that might be the intent of the physical outcome or their skill on that day, or put all the naughty boys in one group, you would mailbox your session. And that takes a little bit of organization beforehand. But actually, you can do that pretty much on the spot on the day as well, depending on your warm-up activities and practices and what you're seeing as to how you then might reorganize your groups for the session that's coming up. And what Dave mentioned there reminded me of one thing which I read very early in my career. I think it was Mark Landsberg, The Tao of Coaching, and the Skill-Will Matrix. Helped me first of all start off with that kind of mailbox approach. Low skill, low will, low skill, high will, high skill, high will. And those people in those areas, how you can actually get them involved to help you manage those group dynamics as well. So although it's a group environment and it is about a team performance, it still is about how that individual is best enabled to express their individual abilities within that team context. And I think once you start to value them as individuals and not just a herd of cattle, and find that time to engage with those individuals, and something which helped me a lot with that was motivational interviewing. The ability to go into a very chaotic team environment, identify those kind of little pleas for help and not join in the banter of piss taking that can go on, and then pull that player and find that time for that one-on-one moment to say, hey, it seems like you're asking something about X. Do you want to tell me a bit more about that? And there's the start of working with players within a team setting, but taking care of them more as individuals.
Motivational interviewing. Hey, no, there's a lot to be said about that. Pete,
you hardly ever mention that.
No. Pete, you've been sat there quiet and observing these two fine gentlemen. I'm really interested to know what you think. You've been exposed to strength and conditioning both as an athlete and then also as, like, what would you say, decrepit, tired old man trying to keep fit?
Easy.
But no, what are your thoughts here? You're hearing a lot of psych stuff.
Well, all I can say there is that as a decrepit old man, I learned a lot from Dave, who's also a decrepit old man. But in terms of the kind of strength work that I'm still doing, a lot of that is based on stuff that I've learned from Dave. So, hats off to him. I think what's really interesting for me is that, we've been talking for quite a while now, and we've been talking about culture, and we've been talking about values, and we've been talking about motivational climate and group dynamics. And like you say, it's all psychology, right? I found a study it was just from last year, actually. And interestingly enough, it was Ale Quartiroli, who has been a guest on this podcast. And they looked at strength and conditioning coaches' perceptions of sports psychology and sports psychology strategies. And Nick, you just mentioned kind of motivational interviewing there. Their study looked at college coaches' use of sports psych skills and strategies in the US. It was about like 400 odd coaches. Most of them reported having less than moderate training. I don't know exactly what that means, but you can figure it out for yourselves. Less than moderate training in sports psychology, but they also reported a moderate to high use of certain sports psych strategies. So not necessarily having the best training in it, but reporting a high use of, using some of those skills like, goal setting, self-talk, relaxation, all of that sort of stuff. So, my question to both of you really is, have you got examples of when you've used some of those kind of classic psych skills? But more than that, I'm sort of interested in how you learn to apply them. Is it kind of instinct? The stuff that you've talked about in terms of culture and environment. Is that instinct as a coach? Is it formal learning? Is it working with psychologists? Nick, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
So just to add to your lit base there, I know a guy that actually helped me a lot in my early days was Dr. Tom Fawcett, who's now at University of Salford, and him along with Paul Comfort have done some similar studies of, psychology and strength and conditioning coaches as well. My original, part of this, even if I go back to being a 15-year-old coach of a boys' football team, was when I yelled at a kid one day, and my assistant coach, who was an adult and a parent, pulled me over and said, "That's probably not the best way to get things out of somebody. These are just young kids." And, I've had so many moments like that when other people I respect have just said one sentence to me, and it's allowed me to shift my paradigm straight away, But I remember, I think the book was Cox, Sports Psychology, in my first year as undergrad at Newcastle Poly, as it was back then, and absolutely hating it and not really enjoying it at all. But interestingly, I started to understand psychology through the eyes of marketing. I enjoyed the marketing courses. I enjoyed understanding how do you get someone to buy something they didn't know they actually wanted to buy. And ultimately, that's what coaching can often be about. My brother was in marketing. So I actually got hooked on psychology through marketing. Then when I wanted to do my master's degree, during that period, I did it was Certified Test of Fitness Award in Canada, and built into that program to become a qualified fitness coach was behavior change, self-efficacy models, counseling, and a model of behavior change that was called the trans-theoretical model. So that was built into my training. And there was an S&C coach there in my master's degree who literally, his attitude was, I don't care what motivates them to get in the gym. I only care once they're in the gym. And I didn't agree with that. I thought it was really important what got them to go through that door. So very early on, well, I say early, mid-20s, when I was doing my master's degree, I took a whole course on exercise psychology, which really looked then at a lot of the behavior change models. It was kind of down to me to then, integrate that into my practice. But I was fortunate I got exposed to that through my formal education. And then I took on a mentor when I was the performance director at University of Durham for a year, called Mark Bellamy, who's a sports psychologist. And also, like I said, I got to know Dr. Tom Fawcett as well. And really use those guys to bounce ideas off and work with me on my coaching skills and abilities and how to make practices more effective. And Tom was also working with us with the Cricket Centre of Excellence at the time at the University of Durham too. So I got to see kind of sports psychology, if you like, in action, very much in the situation, in the environment as well. So just fortunate that it was part of what I was exposed to early on, and was able to recognise that, hey, this is going to make me better as a coach if I actually try to start working on some of this stuff and how I practice.
So a real combination, really, of informal learning from other people and perhaps some of that more formal education stuff. Dave, I wonder what you think as well here. What sort of psych skills do you use? And again, how did you learn to apply them? Again, formal, informal, working with psychs.
So I think there's probably a process of consciousness as you mature as a coach, to understand that it's not about you as an individual and what you know and what you can do, and it's not about the technical knowledge. It's perhaps about how you apply it. And so for me, I think back on some of the sort of pivotal moments where I started to develop what we can call psychological skills. I was dealing with a lot of athletes, TAS athletes, student athletes, who had a lot of challenges and difficulties in just organising their shit as students. And I realised the biggest limiting factor wasn't the prescription I was making or the way they necessarily applied themselves at the gym. It was often other stuff going on in their life, and that was really important. And in fact, I carried out what you might call a screen with athletes when I first met them, asking a few questions of how well they knew their academic schedule or when their deadlines were, or what other sort of stresses and pressures they had in their life, because that was going to impact on what was going on, how they could apply themselves, how they could train, how they could recover. And I really sort of realised quite early that was really important. And that as a coach, as a strength and conditioning coach, I had to take that sort of stuff on. And so, that was a sort of relationship building and building understanding and rapport element that, I guess is a psychological sort of basis. I also remember a point where I had a bunch of athletes that I was training, and I sort of went through the list. And I was like, right, they're shit. Yeah, they're no good. They're not good. And I went through this list, and I sort of mentally checked them all in my head as being shit. And I thought, hang on, who's shit? And there was a pivotal moment there, and it was like a epiphany as such that, right, perhaps the way I'm viewing these guys and perhaps what I'm delivering to them isn't as it's needed to be, or the way I'm viewing them as to the way they need to be coached. So that was perhaps earlier on in my S&C career. Other sort of points of learning, motivational interview, and I've been through the 3 sort of stages of MINT training and found that very useful, eye-opening. And also I spent some time with Joan Duda in an empowering coaching program. And so Joan has obviously got some great research in coaching. and I spent some time down with her in Birmingham, following meeting her at Glasgow Commonwealth Games and seeing her present. And that was really useful to learn self-determination theory and the way they embed it into that coach education program that they run so well.
It's interesting here because what I'm hearing from you, Dave, is take people from where they are, or take them as they are, and not where they should be, or not where you want them to be. And what I've also just heard from Nick is, you have to sell somebody something they don't know they need. I find, like, there's a clash between those two things in a sense. Well, maybe there isn't. I don't know, but I mean, the interesting thing I thought was, whenever I've coached in a weightlifting club, and obviously set up weightlifting clubs myself, um, it's people come to you for your expertise, but when you're dropped into a high performance multidisciplinary team, the athlete's given services from every area, and actually they don't know what they need. They don't know how to use it. And it's just kind of like, well, you're going to actually have to sell to somebody who's pretty pretty much already self-sufficient because they got there, and then they've got all this extra support. So there's a lot of conflict, I think, going on there, and taking somebody where they're at, plus trying to sell them something they need that they don't know. Dave, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts. Firstly, an example of where I've tied those two elements together, if you like. An example is a TAS athlete who was 16, 17, came in, first time in the gym, told me that she didn't like the gym, she didn't like S&C, and this wasn't for her, but she was doing it because it was expected. I thought, okay, right, we'll work with that. And gradually, over a period of time, we got her on board. I found out what she did like, and she did want to develop physical skills. She was going on a summer holiday, and so we put a beach program together. A couple of years later, she was lifting good weight, she was competing at a high level, and she was going to university. She was going to Loughborough University. We put a period of training together based on her being ready to be a Loughborough student. You are no close to your own heart, having spent a lot of time there. But the purpose of her training at that point was A, to fit in, and B, to stand out. And that really motivated her. It wasn't necessarily about the performance effect on badminton, but I remember the text I got on the first sort of week of her time at university saying, "Hey Dave, I'm doing great. Have a first weight session," and the coach asked me what I've been doing, where I've been training, and I'm better than everyone. And she went down to Loughborough, and she was part of the badminton squad, and she was lifting bigger weights, moving better than most of the squad. So that was a point in which where I met her where she was and her dislikes. I sold her the benefits based on what motivated her, and we took her to a decent place and a place of success. The other example is something you might hear or have heard, and that's the athlete is the CEO of the company. And I used this as a metaphor the other day with an athlete, to say that as an athlete they have coaches and different disciplines, and they are the CEO of the company, and they manage the performance, and the different disciplines are different departments in that company. And she, as the athlete, needed to interact and manage and converse and build the work plans of those departments, to have that independent and that autonomy and that central control. And so me as an S&C coach, I was an employee of the department, and she was the boss, and she had to interact and learn to manage me and all the other departments effectively to work towards a performance.
Yeah, Dave, I find the idea of the athlete as a CEO, or the team as the CEOs, so the board of directors, quite an important concept. And I always try and fit in. Look, I work for you, you're my boss, and it puts that person in a position of power. And for a lot of people, they don't know how to manage that at times. Um, Nick, I'm curious. Dave's just talked us through a few things, and I'm sure you've got some ideas. You're sitting in a different area of the spectrum, I suppose, there, and maybe that doesn't fit for you. Maybe it does. Do you want to rip Dave apart, and we'll have a big fight? We'll get a fight going because we're all macho here. It's S&C.
So I work with a lot of individual athletes now, and I work with downhill skiers, and Dave knows by working with Steve Peat, these people are like getting on equipment and go downhill very, very fast where they can get seriously injured. There's a certain psychology or type of person that is. And, the one athlete I'm working with here, I started working with his girlfriend first, who was in the Canadian team. And she took it on trust that I was the guy to work with down here because the person she worked with in Calgary recommended me. And therefore, she had that trust, and I worked their programs through with her. And, at that time, I could have come in with, I'm the powerful one, you do as I say, or she's the one coming in with the power because, she's got the program in the background. And it's that kind of power struggle, I think, that too many coaches go in with determined to win. And, I think there are some athletes that don't want the CEO model. There's some athletes who just want to be told what to do, and that works for them. I know of athletes that if I told them tomorrow's workout today, they'd wake up in the middle of the night having panic attacks about it. They didn't want to know until the day what it was going to be, So then we got to be a little bit careful with bundling everyone up in the same, whatever popular psychology method or words is going on. So in my skier, he had been a member of the US ski team for a lot of years, and he saw me working with his girlfriend, and she said, I know, I think you'll like working with Nick. She was a very executive thinker, and what I mean by that is every detail on the plan she did, even down to tempos and being exactly precise on how much rest she would take between exercises. He'd been exposed to a lot of different physical trainers through his years working with the national team, to the point where in the off season, he disappeared off the national team radar. He did not want to work with the national teams because he was a subject of another coach's power programming over him, rather than him feeling he was doing what was right for him. So we built that relationship up. And you know what? It started from one of my first interviews with him. And I said, look, you've had a lot of experience in training over the years. What do you think's worked for you? And he said, that's the first time anyone in my role ever asked him that question. What's worked for you? And knowing that he'd been a soccer player as a kid, he loved kind of running and the agility. And this guy was way more focused on fluid movement, feeling good. He didn't care about the numbers on the bar. So I could push numbers on the bar because that's what's going to tell me is going to get him stronger as long as he felt good, So we were quite loose with our structure around his programming because he got to that point where he had a say in what we did. We would negotiate what the programming was. So that built trust, For him, he probably was more of a CEO style person, where his girlfriend was like, tell me what I need to do. Now, during the year of COVID, I had to train those two together at the same time with limited equipment and environment and space, and knowing they were very different personalities, but knowing that the constraints of the equipment and the space meant I had to get them doing some things in a very similar way. And that ended up working out really, really well because, her kind of focus on her attention to how her body was feeling actually matched his need to feel good. But he never had as much attention on his warm-ups. So he started spending more time, not just jumping into the workout, but getting his body right for the workout. She then became a little bit more, okay, I don't mind if we adapt and change this today, rather than no, it's on the program, I think that the building of the trust, these athletes have experienced people like us before now. It's been around before. With young athletes, we might be their first experience of this. But we're also adults working with kids, and we don't know if those kids have ever really had a true trusting relationship with older people or parents or whatever. So again, we can tend to be exude our power over them rather than create an exchange with them.
Hello, I'm Hugh Gilmore. I've been told to put in a break for the 80% Mental podcast by Pete. We are the 80% Mental podcast. Thanks. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right. So we're here with we're here with Nick Ward and Dave Hembrough, and we are asking how can we. What was the question again? We're asking how can I bring psychology into the weight room? We've heard some really fantastic insights from both our guests so far. We talked about culture and values and trust and group dynamics and working with individuals. So we've heard some really interesting stuff from both the guys. Hugh, you're sitting there giggling away. Have you got a question that you want to ask?
Yeah, so obviously I've done a bit of weightlifting. I've done a lot of weightlifting coaching, and I was once observing a really, established coach, and he turned around and said to this girl, she had just done a snatch, and he was giving feedback to the girl about her snatch, and he said, "The problem with you is your femur is too long." And I'm sat there, as a young coach going like, all right, okay, what's he going to say next? What's he going to say next? And that was it. It just stopped. And then I'm sitting there like as a young coach going like, what the hell does he do? Like, how do you fix that? Is that like, oh, your femur is too long? Like what, get the hacksaw out and cut a couple of inches off? So, I mean, what's the worst feedback you've heard in the weight room? And what's your best tip for actually giving good feedback as a coach? Because some of the movements in weightlifting are very technical, and S&C, even just the dynamics and the rhythm involved within sprint mechanics and agility and things like that, it's incredibly complex and people don't realize it. Hit me with your feedback knowledge, please.
Guilty as charged. Squeeze your glutes and squeeze your shoulder blades.
Okay.
Providing, it's maybe not the most violent or threatening feedback anyone's got, but probably some of the most useless. In internal kind of cues, to try and elicit some better external kind of action like that. And there is a role for those at times, but in sprinting, for example, we had a little debate of the day about the idea of scissoring thighs. And really, the discussion was like, yeah, that's the pattern we're looking for, but that is never what we would tell the athlete, is to scissor your thighs, because there's too much information in that feedback for them. But to say, punch your thigh forward, brings it down now to something that they can apply, and knowing there's going to be a reaction to that in how they then create that movement pattern. So sometimes there's the breakdown, the description of what we're looking for, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the feedback or the cue that you're going to give.
Nice. Dave, give me some knowledge, please.
Yeah, I've got a very similar example. And in fact, I thought of two examples, and unfortunately it's by the same coach. And the first was he was sort of spotting someone or training with someone, and he was just shouting at them repeatedly. I think they were squatting or deadlifting. Glutes, 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 glutes. And he kept shouting, and he kept shouting louder. And slowly, everyone in the gym sort of stopped and turned and looked at this maniac who was really in the moment and really sort of trying hard to support his partner. And just everyone stopped, and everyone apart from him who was in this bubble was like, wow, look at this. And the same guy at a different place at a different time was training, and someone was doing something for time, and it was hard, and he was giving them some encouragement, and he said, go to that place, go there, go to that place, with massive conviction that the words he was saying were meaningful and were helpful. I don't think they were. So there's a couple of examples. Maybe they were, and maybe that's the sort of thing he needed. In fact, I was at a competition once where I was asked to coach someone I didn't know, and he was doing a PhD in some sort of technology and AI stuff. I remember a brief conversation about who he was and what he did. I thought, okay, you'll be interested. I said, as I'm coaching you, what do you need from me? If you have a poor lift or if you need some encouragement, how can I help you? He said, oh, just tell me to try harder. Okay. And so, that was our coaching relationship. And off he went into the competitive platform. I think he hit a couple of lifts and missed one. He came back and went, try harder. He went, okay. But hey, that's the level at which he knew himself. The other side of that sort of spectrum, a process I like that I know as GBH, is a simple questioning-based format of what went well, what do you need to do better, how do you make it happen? And I really love the dynamic of and the power of coaching through questions. And I love that piece where I've not given any information, I've just asked them what they think. I love that particularly because I hear their language and I hear where their head's at, and often I hear what they say reflecting my language and what I was thinking. And sometimes I don't, and you can learn a lot from that too. So, there's a spectrum there, shouting obscenities and random words and stuff that doesn't mean much, or maybe sort of just questioning through coaching through questioning.
Questioning through coaching through questioning. I like it. So, I think this is really interesting. From a coaching perspective, you've just jogged a horrible memory that was in the deep, dark realms of my mind, where I paid £5 to get coached by somebody in weightlifting, and they were working on the triple extension. And this woman, who was the coach, came behind me with a weightlifting strap and essentially whipped my bum to make me, triple extend more. And she tried to time the whip with the pull of the bar, so that when I was like reaching triple extension, she was trying to whip me so I would triple extend more or something. Like, it was really weird, but I only paid £5 for it. So Pete, what have we got next? Moving very swiftly on.
What am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to say after that?
I don't know. You're psych.
I want to. One of my all-time favorite pieces of coaching, I guess, is not necessarily feedback; it's more instruction. Is when you hear coaches just yelling "focus" at people, like, on what, dude? Like, help me out, give me like. But I want to skip on to a little bit of a later question, because I know Nick hasn't got much time. Nick, what do you wish you'd known about the mental side of performance when you first started out as an S&C coach?
Wow. Wasn't ready for that one. Again, I think it's hard to say when I started, because my mind always was kind of looking at ways to do things better. I think, the stages of change stuff which come along early in my career, helping me sort of understand maybe the cycles people are going round to do something different, was very, very key to me. But again, I was very early in my career then at that point. Honestly, I probably would have to say it's more to do with understanding me more than it probably was to what I could do better with my athletes. I probably could have done sooner. I learned more about me by what I learned about how I could work with my athletes. But maybe that is what, as an early coach, someone had sat down with me and examined me and looked at, my style, my roadblocks to learning, how maybe use video more to watch how I actually did stuff out in the coaching environment. So, yeah, I think more maybe someone working with me specifically as a coach internally first, because I had to turn a lot of that external work I was doing back in on myself later in my career to examine me. I'm a way more confident person on the outside than I am on the inside, and fortunately, I'm able to kind of channel that. But there certainly are times when you hit a lot of self-doubt. Dunning-Kruger effect, I've realized, has been huge in my career. Super confident to go out and say, yes, I can do everything. And then all of a sudden go, oops, maybe a bit more off than I could chew there. So having that kind of mentor maybe earlier on that really helped me to get focused, because I butterflied around a lot with a lot of different things and maybe never went, did any deep work on very specific areas. So, it's hard for me to say that was bad, looking at what I'm doing now and how my very generic abilities are helping many, many things. But yeah, I'd probably say that someone to work more with me on me earlier in my career could have been helpful.
I think that's really interesting, because a lot of our listeners are psychs and trainee psychs as well, and make up sort of the majority of our listenership. Is listenership a word? Don't know. But in terms of how they might be useful when embedded in an environment, like a team environment, and working with some of the coaches, I think what you've said there is some really helpful advice, I guess, how they can perhaps act as that mirror to hold it to you and help you to reflect. So it's not necessarily going in there with advice. Oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. It's going in there and, like Dave said, coaching through questioning, allowing you to perhaps reflect a little bit more and develop that way. Dave, I want to bring you in here as well. Same question to you. What do you wish you'd known about the mental side of performance when you first started out coaching?
I think when you start out coaching, there's a lot of basics you're still figuring out, and it's all very technical and very process and anatomical. And what your psychology and your good coaching influences is personal, and it's to do with people and relationships. But maybe that's a necessity that you need to go through those technical processes to be au fait and a good coach at a basic technical level. And once that becomes just part of who you are and the knowledge that you've got, you can then go on to work at more of a relationship level. So I don't know, Pete, to answer that question, I think perhaps that process is actually quite important. As a young coach, you're looking to take on technical knowledge, and you're looking to define yourself and prove yourself, show you're valid within what you know based on the technical aspects. I know a certain amount of biomechanics and physiology, and I know different bullshit periodization phrases, because that's the foundation. And once you've got that ingrained, then you can start to appreciate that foundation is just part of the picture. So yeah, to know earlier on how much it's to do with relationships and people is really important. But I think moving through that process is an important part too. So I don't know whether I'd sacrifice it. If I can shamelessly plug our Masters in Strength and Conditioning at Sheffield Hallam, it's a Masters in Strength and Conditioning coaching, and we do include those sort of psychosocial elements and that personal approach, and that's essentially really, really important. And perhaps it's coming more into the coaching literature and in strength and conditioning as an industry, through work like Chris Sedlak that Nick mentioned earlier is doing. So yeah, I don't know if that's an answer, but that's my thoughts.
I'll add. Can I add one more thing? Let me just add one more thing, Pete. Actually,
yeah,
I think as strength and conditioning coaches working with performers at different levels, I think this might sound obvious, but we often like to think we know what it's like for them, or you really need this. I think we have, I'm never going to know what it's like to win an Olympic gold medal. I'm never going to know what it was like for those Sheffield Eagles players to win 2 championships. I'm part of that system and environment. And maybe from early on, it's just having a little bit more of an open mind to be comfortable with being uncertain and trusting that the athletes do know themselves better than we do, and who are we to judge that if we don't think they know enough? So again, I think we never really going to understand what it's like to get into the mind of those. And also, I think from early days to understand the difference between a lot of the stuff that me and Dave have been speaking about here. Apparently, it's called psychology, right? I just thought it was being a decent bloke and helping people train better, but apparently, it's called psychology, because most psychology that I was introduced to was about anxiety, depression, pre-game nerves, the yips and all this sort of stuff. Now, we don't touch that area of psychology, so there is another dimension here and another part of that maybe coaches get frightened away from the word psychology because maybe the meaning they attribute to that as well. So, early to understand there's different branches here that coaches are quite welcome to be involved with from early in their careers. I think it's an important message to throw out there.
Nick, you've just hit on a really interesting point, and I want to ask you 2 quick fire questions. If somebody is an S&C coach and they're in a multidisciplinary team and working with a psych, what would you advise that S&C coach to ask the psych, and how would they engage with the psych? And then vice versa, as a strength and conditioning coach, what would you advise a psych to do to try and get buy-in and work with the S&C coach better? Hit me with your knowledge stick.
So I worked with a sports psych called Cal Botterill when I was out in Canada, and he's a veteran of a number of Olympic Games. And he said, we spoke about developing a professional code between the different support staff. And he said, professional code, he said, it means do your fucking job. Your job is to pass information on to another coach that might be pertinent to their role with that athlete. And likewise, you have to be receptive to information being passed on to you by another coach that might be pertinent to your role. Now, we get into the touchy-feely area of privacy, right, and protection and all those things. But I would say to a sports psych, I'm with the athletes a lot. I know there's going to be things you might be working on either with individuals or with the squad. How can I best support you in that role? How might I support you in that role would be the simple question. What matters the most? How can I help you with that? And see if that starts the conversation.
So, Dave, your approach to sport and physical activities changed a bit over your career. I think it's fair to say that as you've moved from elite sport into more of a focus on participation and lifelong physical activity, well-being, health. What are some of the best lessons that you've learned about how to work effectively with people in training environments, in S&C environments, as you've gone through that process, that change?
I think, Pete, as a coach and as a person, I've always been interested in people. I think that helps. Training people has always been about them and not me. And I guess people who know me reasonably well, and I'd like to think and say I've not got an ego per se, or not a huge ego anyway. And it means that the person in front of me is of interest to me, and I want to help and support them. And that's true when I was training more in an athletic environment and training athletes, predominantly student athletes or otherwise, as I talked about earlier. And now it's just a bit more focused on the person in front of me and their personal development and experience with exercise and their relationship with themselves in some ways. I really love the work of Gene Cope in transformational leadership in coaching and participant development coaching. The 4 C's and the 3 P's that he talks about. And I'm really driven to deliver a coaching model through myself and now the coaches I'm mentoring and the coaches at Helen Barbell that has those elements embedded. And we don't get taught that in coaching qualifications. We don't get taught to schedule in a session plan those important aspects. They're the magic things that just magically happen. People play sport, people lift weights, people train, and this stuff just happens. I don't believe that. I think we need to consider it and make space for it and have purposeful intent. And some of the things I do for that is I try and embed meaningful conversations into sessions. And so I'll throw a question out there, or I'll bring a topic for discussion, and I'll give space. So people aren't training physically at that point. They're talking meaningfully and they're connecting. So these are some of the things I'm trying to do. and that comes back to character in the individuals. And I really believe that if people have a better time and have greater connectedness within the training environment, they'll keep coming and they'll get fitter or stronger, and better, whether that's to beat an opposition and play performance sport, whether that's just to have a healthier, happier life.
As I mentioned already, Dave, this podcast is only possible because you connected me and Pete together. I think it says a lot about you. And I think in one of our many conversations, you described yourself as trying to be enthusiastic for people. I think it says a lot. And I think at this point, I'm just going to have to say and raise a little glass to you and say thanks very much for everything you've done. Every time I get caught up with you, it spreads from a case of the weightlifting club's going well to we're working with older people, we're working with younger people, working people with other needs. And what you actually deliver to the community of Sheffield has been just outstanding. I think that's been acknowledged in your Unsung Hero Award from the BBC Sports Personality of the Year. And again, you're very humble about these sorts of things, but look, let's just put the spotlight on Dave and say, well done. Great effort, and he didn't mess up too bad.
Cool. Okay. I like Dave as well. So we've had Nick Ward and Dave Hembrough on today's podcast, where we've been asking how can we bring psychology, or how can we use psychology in the weight room? We've heard some absolutely incredible insights from both of our guests. Again, we've talked about things like creating a culture and a motivational environment for athletes. We've talked about working with individuals versus working with groups. And we've talked about all of the psychology that goes into working with athletes in the strength and conditioning room, or on the pitch, or on the field, or wherever. I hope that it's been useful for our listeners, for our psychologist listeners, for our S&C listeners, for anybody who's working in sport. So I really just want to say a huge thanks to, first of all, Dave Hembrough. Thank you very much. I mean, it's a podcast, so they can't see you doing that. But Dave just saluted at me as if to say, you're welcome. And thanks very much to Nick Ward. I really appreciate you joining us. It's sort of 9 o'clock at night where we are, but it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon where you are. So we appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and speak to us.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. It's been great being on. And look, if any of your listeners or whatever do want to follow up, just reach out. And again, if there's anything more I can get involved with you guys in the future, more than happy to do that. So appreciate you all a lot for having me on today. Thank you.
No worries. We will put everybody's information in the description for the episode. So if you do want to reach out to Nick or Dave, you'll be able to do that by just going to the website, 80percentmental.com. Or you can find us on Twitter at EPM Podcast. And we're also on Instagram as well, at 80% Mental, all words. Like I say, I hope you've enjoyed the episode today. And we will be back with another episode fairly soon. So we'll see you next time. Well, we won't see you because it's a podcast.